Louisiana's Way Home by Kate D. Camillo, Chapter 5. You have to make small plans. This is one of the things I have discovered in this world. It is pointless to make big plans because you never know when someone is going to wake you up in the middle of the night and say, "The day of reckoning has arrived." Days of reckoning interfere with big plans. So I made small plans. The small plans were keep the car on the road, find a dentist, never forgive Granny. Although when I think about it, never forgiving Granny would probably go in the big plan category. Granny moaned. She said, "Why must you haunt me so? What do you want from me?" She also said the word dentist from time to time. I kept my mouth shut. I did not offer Granny any comfort to speak of. And what can I say in my defense, except that I was very angry, and also that I was doing my best under difficult circumstances. Finding a dentist is not as easy as you might imagine. Nothing is. Richford was not a big town. I went past a school and several houses, and a church, and also a pink cement building that had a sign out front that read Bill's Taxidermy. How could a town have a taxidermist in a pink cement building, but not a dentist? I saw a woman walking her dog down the side of the road, and I felt a pang. Who was taking care of Archie the cat? Was he right this very minute walking down the highway in search of me? He had done that before, found his way to me against all odds. "Where is Archie?" I shouted at Granny. Of course she did not answer me. It seemed cruel to press her on the point when she was in so much pain, but as soon as she was not in pain, I intended to do exactly that, press her on the point. In the meantime, I had to find a dentist. I stopped the car. I did this by depressing the brake pedal very carefully and very slowly, and when we had stopped completely, I rolled down the window and called out to the lady with the dog. I said, "Excuse me, what is the name of your dog?" Granny moaned from the back seat. The woman looked at me. I think she was surprised to find a child behind the wheel of a car. Well, I was surprised too. So far it had been a very surprising day. "Pardon me," said the lady. "Does your dog have a name?" "Ernest," she said. "I have a cat named Archie," I told her, "and there's also a dog in my life. His name is Buddy. You will be happy to know that my friends and I worked together to rescue Buddy from a very tragic situation. Buddy is a dog who has only one eye." "How old are you?" said the woman. Her eyes narrowed. "That is an irrelevant question at this juncture," I said. "Isn't it?" I smiled at her, using all my teeth. "I was wondering if you could tell me where the dentist is." "Dr. Fox?" "Certainly," I said. "Should you be driving?" "I should be driving," I told her. I gave her a very serious, grown-up sort of look. "The situation is dire." Granny moaned from the back seat, as if working to prove my point. I smiled at the lady again. Ernest the dog looked up at me and wagged his tail. Animals of every sort have always immediately trusted me. Ernest had a very handsome tail. It was burnished apricot in color. "I admire your tail," I said to Ernest. He wagged it some more. "Where is Dr. Cox?" I asked the lady. "You take a left on Glove Street," said the woman. "And then what?" I said. Granny groaned. "Who is in the back seat?" said the woman. "That is my Granny in the back seat. But continuing on with the directions. After I take a left on Glove Street, what do I do? Dr. Fox's office will be on your right." "Thank you very much," I said. Goodbye, Ernest." Ernest waved his impressive tail. I rolled up the window. The whole exchange had cheered me considerably. I had located a dentist. I had met a dog named Ernest. Also, I liked it that Dr. Fox was on Glove Street. If you put the words together, That sounded like a song. I started to sing the Dr. Fox on Glove Street song. Where is Dr. Fox? You take a left on Glove and then you continue on. You take a left on Glove and you sing this song. Granny moaned from the back seat. I got so happy singing the Dr. Fox song that I almost forget about the wrongs I had suffered at Granny's hands. Almost. Chapter 6. The clock in Dr. Fox's office said it was 9:47. I was struck by how much had happened since 3 a.m. I had been kidnapped by Granny. We had crossed over a state line. We had run out of gas. I had eaten 14 very small bags of peanuts. I had seen my life flash in front of my eyes. I had met Ernest. I had found a dentist. And I had driven a car. My goodness, I said to the lady behind the desk at Dr. Fox's office. Would you look at the time? So much has happened. I was going to tell her about my amazing exploits, or at least some of them, but it was very clear that the woman was not in a good mood. She was staring at me and tapping her pencil against the desk. Her lips were very thin. Yes, she said. I smiled at her. Good morning. My granny is in desperate need of a dentist. I expected the receptionist to say something along the lines of, well, you are in exactly the right place. But she didn't say anything at all. Instead, she bent her head and started flipping through the pages of an appointment book. I stood there and waited. The office smelled like peppermint and rubbing alcohol. There was some music playing above our heads. It was a sad and wordless kind of song. On the desk there was a sign with white letters that said Mrs. Ivy. I thought that was a pretty name for someone with such thin lips. Mrs. Ivy? I said. She looked up at me. It's an emergency, I said. Do you have an appointment with Dr. Fox? I do not have an appointment because it is an emergency, I said in a very patient voice. You cannot make an appointment for an emergency because emergencies are entirely unexpected. My granny is in a great deal of pain. I'm afraid that we are all booked up for today, said Mrs. Ivy. Her lips got even thinner. May I speak with Dr. Fox? I said. You most certainly may not, said Mrs. Ivy. There was another woman in the waiting room, an older woman who was working on a crossword puzzle and pretending not to notice that the receptionist and I were engaged in a battle of wills. That is what Granny called situations like this, a battle of wills. She always told me that I could win any battle of wills. Your opponent will be willing to give up at some point, but you must never give up. The trick is to never give in. Be wily, and remember, no retreat. You must never retreat. So instead of retreating, I was wily. I walked over to the waiting room and went and stood next to the crossword puzzle lady. There was a painting above her head that showed some green trees standing together in the sunshine. In the far left-hand corner of the painting, in a dark paddle of a shadow, there crouched a fox. I stood with my hands behind my back and considered the painting. Was the fox supposed to represent Dr. Fox the dentist? What are you doing? Said Mrs. Ivy. I'm admiring the painting, I said without turning around. I don't need an appointment to admire the painting, do I? The woman with the crossword puzzle book looked up at me and smiled. Hello, I said. Hello, said the woman. Are you doing difficult puzzles or easy ones? They are medium, said the woman. She had a kind face. Also, doing medium crossword puzzles, not too hard and not too easy, made her seem very trustworthy to me. Are you willing to give up your dental appointment to someone who is in desperate pain? I asked. Pardon? Said the crossword woman. My granny needs help, I said, and I am wondering if you would donate your appointment with Dr. Fox to her. I'm afraid I don't have an appointment to donate, said the woman. It's my husband's appointment, you see. He's back there now getting his teeth cleaned. You need to leave, said Mrs. Ivy. I assumed that Mrs. Ivy was talking to me and not to the medium crossword puzzle lady, but I had no intention of leaving. And in any case, it all ceased to matter. Because at that moment, Granny opened the door to Dr. Fox's office and came staggering in with her hand to her mouth. She was howling in a truly impressive way. Chapter 7. Mrs. Ivy shrieked, a surprised little thin-lipped shriek. The crossword puzzle lady stood up out of her chair. She said, Heavens! The crossword puzzle book fell from her hands and landed on the floor. Help me, said Granny to Mrs. Ivy. We are all booked today, said Mrs. Ivy, but she didn't sound very certain when she said it. Clearly, the time for certainty had passed. Granny shouted, help me! She had on her fur coat. Her hair was standing up straight on her head. Suddenly, I saw her like other people might see her, and I will not lie to you, it scared me. How can I say this? She did not look trustworthy. She looked like somebody with a curse upon her head, which of course was exactly the case. Granny, I said. And then a little man in a white coat came out from behind a closed door. He said, Is there a problem here, Mrs. Ivy? Mrs. Ivy said, There is a small scheduling inconsistency, Dr. Fox. No need to concern yourself. Granny put out her arms. Mrs. Ivy said, Stand back! But it was too late. Granny went running toward Dr. Fox, and when she got to him, she fell down and clutched his feet. Well, what could Dr. Fox do? He took her into his office. Mrs. Ivy was not pleased. She had been outwitted in the battle of the wills. She sat down at her desk. Her lips got so thin that they disappeared entirely. It turned out that Granny did not have one bad tooth. They were all bad. This is what Dr. Fox came out and told me. He stood in front of me in his white coat, adjusted his tiny glasses, and said, I'm afraid that the infection was profound and systemic. I looked at him and thought that he did not resemble a fox at all. He looked more like a mouse. His nose in particular was very thin and mouse-like. It twitched in a very nervous way when he spoke. Profound, said Dr. Fox again. Systemic. Oh my goodness, I said. I bent over. It was suddenly very hard for me to breathe. I have very swampy lungs, and in times of distress they often fail me. Carol Ann took hold of my hand and squeezed it. I squeezed back. Carol Ann was the medium difficulty crossword puzzle lady, and we had become good friends while Dr. Fox was busy pulling out each and every one of Granny's teeth. Carol Ann was a retired librarian, and we had talked for some time about our favorite books. She was very familiar with the story of Pinocchio, and even knew that the cricket was killed with a mallet at the beginning of the book. Carol Ann was going to visit her grandchildren after her husband's teeth got cleaned. She was taking her grandchildren some chocolate chip cookies, which, when she found out how very hungry I was, she was happy to go out to her car and retrieve and share with me. The cookies were in a red Christmas tin with a green wreath on it. There were little spots of raised up white on the tin that was supposed to represent a joyous snowfall. In addition to the chocolate chips, there were walnuts in the cookies, and that was a surprise. Walnuts are not my favorite nut, but they are a good nut nevertheless. I had eaten 5 walnut and chocolate chip cookies. The Christmas tin was still in my lap. I looked down at it after Dr. Fox delivered his dental news to me. I ran my fingers over the raised spots of snow. I stared at the wreath. It was a very cheery-looking tin, but to tell the truth, it did not cheer me up very much to consider it. My situation was growing ever more dire. She will, of course, need to recuperate, said Dr. Fox. Antibiotics, painkillers, and bed rest. It is quite a shock when all the teeth are removed at once. I took a deep breath. I looked up at Dr. Fox. All of them? I said. There is truly not a tooth left in her head? Who would Granny be without her teeth? You could say what you wanted about Granny. She lied, she stole, she had a curse on her head. True, true, true. But she was, at the very least, the kind of person who smiled a lot. She used her teeth a great deal. Yes, said Dr. Fox. I thought it was best to prepare you. It will be all right, said Carol Ann. She squeezed my hand again. I wanted to believe her. I stared at Dr. Fox, the dental mouse. I looked him in the eye. I said, Thank you very much for attending to my granny. I noticed there was a spot of blood on Dr. Fox's white coat. It was just one little drop, and it looked like something out of a fairy tale, like a pinprick on Sleeping Beauty's finger. It made me want to cry. But then I saw Mrs. Ivy sitting at her desk, looking disapproving, and I thought, well, I will not give her the satisfaction. And I did not. And then there was the matter of the bill. This was what Mrs. Ivy said. There is the matter of the bill. Dr. Fox's services are not free. I said, I did not expect them to be. You may mail the bill to us. And on the spot, I made up a person and an address. I said, You may send the bill to my grandfather. He pays all our bills. His name is William Sunder. He is at 1221 Blue Fairy Lane, Lister, Florida. My granny and I are just passing through. We are on vacation. It was deeply satisfying to lie to Mrs. Ivy. However, the satisfaction did not last long because Granny emerged from the back room. In addition to being toothless, she looked stunned, as if somebody had hit her over the head with something very heavy. I followed behind Granny as she staggered out the door into the parking lot. I said, Granny, Dr. Fox says you need to recuperate. I am perfectly capable of driving, as I demonstrated earlier today. You can recuperate in the back seat, and I will drive. Granny turned and faced me and held out her hand. She said, Give me the keys, Louisiana. Her voice was strange, muffled and uncertain and toothless. She didn't sound like herself at all. It was alarming. What could I do? I handed her the keys. We got in the car and Granny got behind the wheel. We left Dr. Fox's parking lot and went down the road. Granny's face was very white. She was driving slowly, staring at the road in a grim and determined fashion. I said, Where are we going? Do not bother me with small questions, Louisiana, she said in her new disturbing voice. Well, to me, where are we going did not seem like a small question. It seemed like the biggest question of all. But then I remembered that I was angry with Granny. I remembered that I was not speaking to her. And I decided that in addition to not speaking to her, I would never ask Granny a question again. We drove until we got to a motel called the Good Night Sleep Tight. It was a small motel with a big sign that featured a giant neon candle and neon letters spelling out Good Night Sleep Tight. There was a painted sign in the window of the motel office that said, A good night's sleep is a good thing indeed. This was a sentiment that I agreed with, particularly since I had not had a good night's sleep the previous night, having been awoken at 3 a.m. and told that the day of reckoning had arrived. Are we staying here? I asked Granny. And then I remembered that I was not talking to her or asking her any more questions ever again. Granny turned to me. She said, Go inside. Use your charm and secure a room for us, Louisiana. I stared at her. She stared at me. We stared death rays at each other. We were engaged in a vicious battle of the wills. But after a very long time, I looked away. Granny had won. Even without her teeth, she had won. She was still a force to be reckoned with. I got out of the car. I slammed the door as hard as I could. And that's the end of chapter 7.